Hello, I'm Mark Munns with the Georgia Forestry Commission. All-terrain vehicles such as this four-wheeler and this utility vehicle have been popular tools with landowners as well as prescribed burn managers for quite some time, as they're used to patrol containment lines, haul tools or water, or even as a source of ignition. It's very important that we recognize that the use of these machines in a live fire environment create a very unique set of hazards and risks that must be mitigated to ensure safe operation. It is not the intent of this presentation to encourage you nor discourage you from using these machines on a prescribed fire, but instead to share some lessons learned. These lessons learned were derived from in-depth safety investigations of previous accidents and injuries that occurred while using these machines in a live fire situation. As we move forward and look at some watch-out situations and design considerations for a torch unit or other attachments and arrangements, please take note, and at the end of this presentation, go back and review your machine and its setup and plan on these watch-out situations prior to performing your next prescribed burn. Nothing in this presentation should supersede your company or agency's policy and procedure, nor the manufacturer's specifications or guidelines. These watchouts are situations that have resulted in serious accidents and/or injuries. They must be considered in the early planning stages of a burn. They should also be considered just prior to ignition, and again if anything causes you to change your ignition plan. Rolling or flipping over is a well-documented concern in all-terrain vehicles. It is important to understand that by adding too much overall weight or too much unbalanced weight, we could actually increase the risk of rolling or flipping over. As you can see here, rolling while carrying flammable fuel in a live fire environment can quickly escalate into an even more intense situation. When we ride up or down terrain, we have to shift our body weight to maintain the balance of the machine. For the purposes of this presentation, let's call that maintaining the center of gravity. Adding weight to one end or the other can shift our center of gravity, even on relatively flat ground. As you look at the red line in these drawings, think of the red line as a plumb bob and imagine the effects of the added weight when we go up or down terrain. So how do we add our attachments such as tools, torches, extinguishers, or other needed items? Let's consider that most manufacturers design a combination of brush guard and winches that weigh around 40 pounds. Let's use that 40 pounds as a counterbalance rule, meaning that once you add up to 40 pounds in the front, add more weight to the back. Never exceed 40 pounds on one end or the other. Now keep in mind, while counterbalancing, only add what you really need to the machine, and it should never exceed the manufacturer's established GVW or specifications of the equipped racks on the machine. So in this video, you can see how adding weight to only one end of the ATV, in this case the rear, affects its balance and its center of gravity. Not all ATVs or UTVs are designed to safely maneuver at the same amount of grade or slope. So even if you kept added weight from attachments very balanced, you still must become familiar with the limitations of your machine and the ability to operate it in terrain. Keep in mind that all-terrain vehicles can usually handle more slope when they're being driven straight up or straight down the slope, more so than being driven on cross or side slope. A low-profile design of any attachments is a plus in these situations. Tanks of water or fuel can add to instability and shift the center of gravity quickly as all the liquid slams to one side. A lower profile tank and baffling should reduce the effects when in uneven terrain. Unscouted ignition lines can increase the risk of entrapment. The only way to ensure an ignition line is safe to ignite from an ATV is to actually scout it out before ignition. Looking at topo maps or photos can be misleading. A gust of wind could have occurred the night before and a huge snag is across your line. Try to avoid operating in areas where you can't see the ground at all. ATVs weren't quite designed to go absolutely anywhere. If your burn plan involves igniting in these areas, perhaps consider having some interior dozer lines installed prior to the day of the burn.
Pierce, Hawkins. Pierce, Hawkins.
Go ahead.
I heard the four-wheeler stuff. You okay down there?
Yeah, that's affirmative. I've got the fire put out behind me a little ways, but I'm hung up on a rock. I'm gonna need something to get it off with.
I copy. We'll round something up and get it headed your way.
Turning around ATVs with attachments can be more difficult than people realize. It's one thing to turn around in an old road bed or a widely bladed fire break, but doing it in a deeply plowed fire break in a tight stand of trees or other fuels takes some practice and some familiarity with the machine, especially if you've added additional attachments. Torch units do develop wear and tear, so it's not uncommon to find leaks around welds, valves, or hoses. Leaking torch fuel can not only cause the machine to ignite, but could soak into your clothes, resulting in severe or fatal burns. If a torch unit is malfunctioning in any way, put it out of service immediately by shutting off the fuel supply and snuffing out the wick. Then remove the tank from the ATV as soon as possible. While riding into woods, fuel such as leaves and straw will accumulate in any open crevice. So make it a habit that every time you stop, you remove these fuel beds. Otherwise, an ember from your burn could ignite it. Inspecting an ATV for a burn operation is a little more than your basic operator inspection as recommended by your manufacturer. You must also inspect the attachments, especially if you have a torch unit attached. The following slides will go over some of the specifications recommended for torch units and will give you a better idea of what to inspect on them. An ATV torch wand should be designed so that it can extend 16 inches beyond the edge of the ATV. This helps to ensure that the flame can get into the intended fuel bed but is not easily blown back onto the ATV. When designing or fabricating a torch fuel tank, it is important that any hard connection, such as the valve pictured here, is mounted in a way that it is protected during rollover. Otherwise, when it breaks off, it could escalate into a situation that neither you nor your fire extinguisher are prepared for. Torch fuel lines are exposed to abrasion, dry rot, and excessive heat, so cover them in a heat-resistant protective sleeve for protection. Inspect them regularly and replace them as needed or at least annually. A cutoff valve that is highly visible and easily accessible from the driver's seat should be mounted between the tank and the wand. A quarter valve shutoff, such as the one illustrated in the upper right of your slide, would keep fuel from flowing if the trigger switch jammed or got pinned during a rollover, or if the pump malfunctioned. Ignition switches, as pictured in the lower left of your slide, should only be a momentary type of switch. This means it requires pressure to activate the pump, which in return reduces unintentional ignitions. Ignition switches should never be located behind the operator. Malfunctioning or leaking fuel tanks can be a dangerous situation on any fire line. Sometimes it's safer to dismount the tank, set it to the side until you can retrieve a safe container to pour the fuel into, than to continue traveling with the leaking tank. Drop pin mounting and quick connects for your fuel and electrical line should all be designed and mounted in a manner so that you can disconnect and set the tank to the side in a timely manner. Fire extinguishers are a vital tool, as long as you can get to them and as long as you can use them. Extinguishers mounted to a torch fuel tank aren't always accessible if any portion of that tank is on fire. A few seconds may be all you have to extinguish a fire while it's small, and it's just that, a few seconds. Extinguishers should be mounted away from the torch unit and protected from vines, limbs, or rollover, and must be inspected prior to ATV use. The arrangement, shape, and weight of torch or water tanks plays a huge role in the stability of the machine. Consider that a gallon of water weighs roughly 8 pounds. How that weight is dispersed or arranged on the machine is an important factor. Tanks should be designed with a low profile style and not exceed 7 gallons if mounted on the front rack and 10 gallons if mounted on the rear rack. Operators should never use any ATV that they're not familiar with to ignite fires. First become familiar with the ATV through gradual exercise, then become familiar with the attachments, the location of the safety devices and tools, and never underestimate the skill needed to operate an ATV in a live fire environment. Always scan ahead for hazards and continuously monitor the ignition process.